Welcome to Ideas of India, where we examine the academic ideas that can propel India forward. My name is Shruti Rajagopalan, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercator Center at George Mason University. Today, my guest is Snigdha Poonam, who's a journalist and writer. She's the author of the new book Scamlands and also the author of the 2018 award-winning book Dreamers: How Young Indians Are Changing Their World. We talked about the scam industrial complex in different states like Jharkhand and Assam and Tamil Nadu in India, the interaction between the scam economy and the formal economy, the transnational scams in China and Cambodia and how they are connected to India, the aspirations and traumas of the scam workforce, and much more. For a full transcript of this conversation, including helpful links of all the references mentioned, click the link in the show notes or visit mercators.org/podcasts. Hi, Snigdha. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shruti. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to read this book. And normally when we think about a scam or a scandal or a fraud, it seems like an outlier event, like this one-off thing where the rest of the economy is kind of sorted and is functioning in a regular sort of above ground way. And there's this one weird thing that's happening, whether it's a phishing scam or a gambling scam or whatever else it could be. But what I learned from your work is it's much bigger than that. It's incredibly organized. It's happening at an industrial scale. It's got all the characteristics of all other major sectoral activities, right? So there's very organized capital around it. There is very organized hiring and labor around it. You know, sometimes, of course, they are even the people working in these scams are tricked into it. But it's done in this very, very organized, large way that it interacts in enormous ways with the formal part of the economy. You know, all the standard tools of verification and paperwork and digital infrastructure are used in these major phishing scams and, you know, all the pig slaughter scams. And what you end up getting is almost like this parallel avenue. It reminds me of, you know, like the parallel economy you have in war times or a parallel economy you have during prohibition, right? Yeah. There's like this formal part of the economy and then there's this whole other thing which is going on, which is very, very organized, incredibly large, impossible to trace and shut down. So that was the first sense that I got from reading the entire book. Am I kind of on the right track or were you going for something completely different?
No, absolutely you are. And that's why I was like trying to make some notes for myself because it's something that I had to be very clear about setting out to write this book, in that I didn't want to write stories of these, you know, dazzling individual scamsters or like really standout gangs that, you know, some guy who's married 65 women and each one's like a fraud at a extraordinary scale. No, not so. I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to look at, you know, scams and as an organized economy, because I've had that sense for more than almost 10 years now. So I had to let go of like a lot of crazy sounding stories of just like one person or mostly just one person or a small group like carrying out these scams that feel very exciting to read about, but don't tell you much if you're trying to really find out what's happening at the societal level.
So, you know, maybe we'll start with India because that's a little bit more familiar to me. I think now the Jamtara phishing scams are pretty well known, right? I mean, there's Netflix series about it. It's been well covered in the newspaper. There are lots of people have been arrested. You know, the police that did the investigation have been applauded and awarded and all sorts of things, right? So it seems to be the most salient in some sense in our minds, at least in India, Jamtara as a location. But what you track is something much more interesting than the phishing scam, right? Because what you're getting into is who would want to join a scam like this? Like, what are sort of the incentives, I guess, of the people who are running it? What are the incentives of the people joining it? And if we start layering the incentives a little bit more, it's not just about the individual person's incentive, right? It's also about communities. It's like, why would someone who is, let's say, a graduate from a relatively disenfranchised community, or why is someone who is a young person who has an engineering degree or no jobs, why are these people actually attracted to this kind of work? And why would they risk this level of criminality to begin with, right? So what what did you find like 2 layers deep? Like 1 layer deep, we know why these guys are doing this. It's a reasonable way to make money in a world where there is massive unemployment and underemployment. And even the locations you go to are not exactly the fastest growing districts in the country, right? There's a real economic crisis brewing in these places. But I guess, what do you find 2 layers in?
I had met this cyber police officer in Delhi before I set out for Jharkhand, my home state. And he had been working on these Jamtara scams for years. And he told me, this is the story. You go to these villages and like there are hundreds of villages in those hundreds of villages, you think about hundreds of thousands of people earning millions of like rupees every month from these scams. And that to him was the story. And in some sense, that wasn't wrong in any sense. The numbers, the scale, the ambition, I found all of that to be true. But like within days of actually sort of hanging out in Jamtara, it was quite clear to me that alone, like just the numbers, the ambition, the scale wasn't the story. I think there were so many other things going on. One of the things that blew my mind away quite early on was just how many levels of participation there was in the community. And then I find that sort of replicating across not just Jharkhand, but also I show a similar structure in Assam. And of course, there are multiple other places that don't even get into the book. But something similar was happening in all these places. So you have like at the core of all of these communities is a vast sort of set of young people out of college, maybe like college dropouts, school dropouts, say anywhere between 15 years old to 25 years old. You've hundreds of them in just like one cluster of villages. And so they are the ones that are actually making the calls that go out from Jamtara. In a single village, you'll find every other person is involved in some way. There were like a number of people who have legitimate, respectable jobs. Within like a week, I was running into like panchayat chiefs whose job it was to put up bail when a cyber chore was arrested. Because he's respectable, the family will give him a couple of lakh rupees to put up bail, and then that's how it rolled out. But you have these banking correspondents, what are called the customer service points.
Yeah.
And they have like a very specific role in the rural economy, but they also help these scamsters route the scam money by opening bank accounts in their name and then collecting the scam money in their accounts and then sort of sending it out through various financial legitimate channels, as you said. Like, so the linkages between the formal economy and the shadow economy. There is like a public health center in the case of Assam where a doctor works full time and his job is a real job, except that when someone dies and then a scamster wants to then take a life insurance policy in the dead guy's name, he still has to sign the death certificate. So and you are an economist, so you'll appreciate this, but like the whole economic side of it just blew my mind away. Just how organized it was, how everyone knew the role that they had to play. There used to be these e-commerce delivery guys who, when like even especially in the Jamtara scams, when they scan you, when they're inside your bank, often they don't want that money to come into their bank, not even like an associate's bank anymore. So they will go to an Amazon or eBay and then buy a number of luxurious things, and then they'll send that to a fabricated address somewhere around their village. And the delivery guy knows that address doesn't exist. He knows where to deliver it, and for each delivery, he'll have a cut. So that sort of like I have called it the crooks economy somewhere in the book. And I think that like the crooks economy and not just these hundreds of thousands of boys as the police officer had sort of portrayed to me. So I think that among many things, I think that was one of the things that I knew that I had to go deeper into.
So, one of the things I want to talk a little bit more about, and this is specifically about what is happening in Jamtara, but more broadly in Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, that kind of region. For something to be this, broad-based and cutting across class and caste and, everyone's involved, like you said, right? Everyone from the head of the panchayat to the delivery guy to the young kid who has just come out of college, but his parents have no real means. For something like that to take root, everyone has to think that what is happening is not wrong. At some core level.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Right? That is what kept jumping out to me throughout what you were telling me. And what it seemed like was, almost they have confused aspiration and the desire to make money and earn a living for their family with something respectable. Like, no one thinks this is not a respectable thing to do. In some sense. Of course, it's not as respectable as getting an engineering position or a government job or a nice white collar job in a stable economy. But normally what we used to call 400 BC, people who are fraudsters and who are looked upon as fraudsters, all the teeny middlemen who are engaged in this broader scam, no one's really judged very harshly for it. So am I misreading the way you portrayed them in the book? Because it almost seems like they all have reasonable justifications for doing what they're doing. They can't find jobs. They have responsibilities. This is a way to make money. They're only really stealing from the rich. In the process of stealing from the rich, they're not harming anyone. They're not murdering. They're not mugging anyone. It's not a regular... I mean, there's harm, but there's no face-to-face harm. And in that sense, they seem to think that they have no victims and nothing terrible is happening. Is that a good way to think about what's going on in these villages?
Yes. In a lot of these camps, they can't see what the real damage is. If they're stealing from someone, they already know the distance between Jamtara and Delhi or Bombay. Even if they're making a random call, usually they'll just typing random numbers and they can be connected to anyone. They are hoping that they get connected not to someone in the next village, but someone in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, where the distance, not just physical, but social between them and their victim is vast enough that some of that moral guilt that burden starts to lessen. So that was very common. And the other thing is that, yes, as you said, if everyone is involved, then how can you feel guilty? Some of these people are very young. Like one of the protagonists that I have in the early chapters is in school. He's in 7th or 8th class when he starts to train in these camps. And so when do you even start to build that sense of right and wrong? If you begin that early, everyone is in it. Everyone in the school every other boy are doing these camps. They are the ones training him. And then who in this scenario can be the highest person in this community for him to look up to? The local MP or the local MLA. But
they're all involved.
They're all involved. They are funding their campaigns through the scamsters' scam money. And then they are protecting them. There are actual live clips of the MLA from the region saying, if our boys are so clever, then it's something to think about. It's not, they are not to blame. The people who are losing these vast sums of money in Kerala and Maharashtra and Delhi, they should think about what they are lacking in terms of sense and reason. And so I think in a lot of these places there was a considerable amount of pride that amongst very sort of high levels of society, even the police guys. Every time I went into the cyber police station in Jamtara, they started the story of how the original mastermind from Jamtara defrauded Amitabh Bachchan. And to everyone, if you go there tomorrow, they'll start the story still with Amitabh Bachchan, because the police people, even if their job is to investigate the scams and arrest these guys, also take pride in it.
Yeah.
So yes, I shouldn't have been so surprised that they don't feel very concerned. There's not much guilt or shame.
Yeah, and now the second layer of this is how the state is involved. And here I don't just mean state functionaries like an MLA or something, but the state actively. So, in the Jamtara sort of scenario, you have an entire new digital infrastructure. And I won't say the state has imposed it on people. I mean, of course, there's massive adoption of UPI and Aadhaar and all those sorts of things. But it's a layer in a society which was not very legible and which didn't have very high levels of digital literacy and which didn't have high levels of trust and, sort of trading with strangers. It didn't have all those checks and balances built into the analog economy. So now the sort of pretense is, the analog economy is very hard to build trust, but in the digital economy, it's much easier to build trust. Why? Because we have Aadhaar numbers and OTPs and KYCs and blah, 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 right? And now these guys have figured a way out to undercut the checks and balances built in the digital economy. And as always, the state is 2 steps behind. So that's the sense that I got when I look at what's happening in Jamtara. But when I immediately, your chapter, I think it's the chapter right after that, the one in Assam, it's half the problem is the state. It is the massive amount of paperwork that is required of people in a way that they sometimes literally need to prove that they are themselves, right? So they have to show up to places. There's this poor woman who says, hey, I'm alive and
Yes.
I'm not dead, and someone's faking my death and collecting my life insurance money, and there are 17 middlemen involved in proving that I'm dead and completely erasing my identity. And it's impossible to prove that you are the person who's now being portrayed as dead. But the state is involved at every level. First, the state demands half of this paperwork. Second, the state doesn't have the capacity to issue half the paperwork, right? We don't have good state registries of properties or assets or, like registering wills and things like that. What you end up having is this crazy scamster economy, which was entirely sort of almost sitting on the foundation of this state dysfunction in that area.
Yes. Yes. I think in both the chapters, the infrastructure was already there for the scamsters to invent a scam that best fit that, the openings left. So the story from Assam is centered on a particular district. It's called Borpeta, not very far from Guwahati. It's just a couple of hours ride from in a car. But it looks at a scam economy that stretches far beyond Borpeta. So like with Jharkhand, we're talking about a region rather than one village or even a cluster of villages. So, think about like dozens and dozens of taluks and blocks and tehsils. And what they do is insurance scam. Sounds really straightforward to begin with, but it's like it's one of the cleverest things that I've ever come across. It all sort of like hinges on people's deaths. Let's say mostly untimely deaths. So like, if there's a man, is a 40-year-old, he's out fishing in a pond and gets struck by electricity and he dies. Now, the moment that he dies, someone maybe like he's taken to the to the primary health center, and then onwards his body is taken onwards to his house. In that very brief time, the word spreads to a really large network, again, like young men, jobless, of these insurance scamsters who will then sort of decide that they need to move quickly, and they will approach the family, mostly like maybe if she has a wife, she'll ask the wife, they'll try to bribe the wife and put forward this proposition that we are going to take out an insurance policy, a life insurance policy, in this dead guy's name, this guy who is already dead, and then allow for some time to pass, maybe 2 months, sometimes like less than 2 months. And after that period passes, they will then show that the man has died, like produce a fake death certificate for him and claim the insurance money. And most of them were doing this to exploit a scheme started by the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
An insurance policy that the Prime Minister started to stretch the benefits of life insurance to vast sort of sections of rural population that had until then been completely cut off from life insurance sector. And the scheme spread so rapidly that by the time that like my colleague and I arrived in Borpeta, we could hardly think of anyone who had died in this manner. Like sometimes it would be a road accident, like a 25-year-old guy's on a motorbike and he has an accident and he's dead, and then before the next day, they have a line of insurance scamsters waiting at the doorstep trying to strike a deal with the family. And then again, like, mentioned, this cannot, like, how can you show someone to be dead if you don't have the complicity of the whole local governance structure, including the government doctors?
Yeah.
And the number of certificates that needed to have been produced, including in some cases, people didn't have to die. They didn't even have to be born. So they created whole individuals out of thin air. And that would mean sort of showing that someone was born, that someone went to school, and then, so on and so forth. And then finally, this non-existing person
they
died.
build like the paperwork around a fictitious person, right? So they have a 10 standard pass certificate. Like they have everything that one requires to kite.
School principal will sign, the local passport photo guy will produce a passport photo to go with this non-existing guy. Passport photo that belongs to a real individual. So yes, again, like on a structural level, this was massive.
So, a couple of questions on that. So, what I found super interesting in what was going on in Assam is there are 2 points of entry here, right? So, one is you see that there are these crazy number of insurance scams going on. But if you really look into that, they're really scamming the government, right? So, there's one kind of scam where there's a fictitious person created out of thin air, and now the government's going to issue a life insurance policy or at least subsidize a life insurance policy. So who are you scamming? You're scamming the government. But there's a second layer to it where they're scamming real people who are alive but pretending they're dead. So this is like Aisha, right? Who is estranged from her husband, and the family is now pretending, or I mean, at least trying to prove that she's dead so that the husband is then free to do whatever he wants. She's not just an estranged wife, she's a dead wife, and also make money off of it. And meanwhile, she is going pillar to post to prove to people that she's alive. So the two scams feel slightly different to me, though everyone involved is sort of similar. In one, there is a very obvious person who's being harmed, who's right there in front of you struggling. And in another one, it's like a nameless, faceless state and some union government scheme which is being milked.
Yeah.
Right? And the two somehow have a different texture to it. When you talk to these people, do they sound like they understand this difference? Or is this now just like at each stage, it's like paperwork being signed, no one knows what's going on?
Yeah, in the case of Assam, the justifications came much quicker and more fluently because in that, who is being scammed, right? So yes, the government is, but then the government is also benefiting from it, right? Because even just after I finished the story, you had the finance minister present the data from the number of people that had benefited from this scam, who had taken out life policy and whose next of kin had already been.
So it's padding up the government numbers in some sense, even if they're not outright benefiting, they're losing money, but they are showing up as if this is all good data.
This was all like a really beautifully, run system in which like the government, like maybe the government of India isn't, the finance minister does not know this in Delhi, but like the representatives at that level of the taluk, the tehsil village know very well what was going on. Because I'd also like reported another sort of really big story from the same region of these farmers. The farmer scheme, the scheme in which the government sort of deposits, I think, around 6,000 rupees in every farmer's bank account in 3 installments. And I think the government just like kept on boasting about some 30 lakh people had been given out.
Beneficiaries,
had been beneficiaries, but actually half of them didn't exist. So in every other household, my colleague and I would find someone had been invented, again, like non-existing persons, like one person opening 4 accounts, like someone pretending to be a farmer when they were a bank officer. And everyone knew. So the people who were even like distributing these schemes or were part of like executing the scheme at the local level knew what was going on. And they would still keep quiet because they had to show the numbers, and the numbers would like keep traveling upwards in files until they reached Delhi. And the Delhi had to show the numbers as 30 lakh, 60 lakh, 90 lakh beneficiaries. So I don't think that if these people thought that defrauding the state wasn't the greatest sort of crime, then maybe they did have a point.
Yeah, and also the state is complicated in the Northeast, right? Like the union government is half the times an enemy, quite explicitly, not an ally. So it also matters which government and which scheme, and the people don't take very kindly towards what is coming from Delhi in some sense. I imagine that there's no guilt associated with it. But there was something even more curious that I learned from your chapter in Assam, which is there is a paperwork and legibility economy which is running parallelly because of Assamese politics, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a state which is famous for having a very big sort of internal clash over ethnicities and immigrants and people, who belongs to Assam and who doesn't is really up for challenge even after all these decades, right? So there's one layer of who is ethnically Assamese and really belongs to the land. So that's one layer of what's going on. The second layer of it is, of course, what happened with the Bangladesh war, and there were settlers who crossed the border, and that's another layer of what's going on. And the third layer is, of course, the standard clashes over religious lines, right? So even if you're an Indian Muslim who's Bengali speaking, now you're under suspicion of having been someone who was associated at some point from crossing the border sometime between 1971 and today. And this has caused lots of different things going on. I mean, there's all sorts of legibility required to be on voting lists. There's, of course, the famous, the National Register, which Assam in some ways invented this idea and which is now, being sold to the rest of the country. But everyone understands how complicated these politics are. And to solve for it, there is a paperwork and legibility economy. Because all these people who are disenfranchised at some level have to prove that they exist. They have to prove that they've passed 10th certificate. They have to prove that they always belong to this land or their parents were born here. And there was always an army of middlemen and agents who specialized in either withholding that paperwork or providing that paperwork. And now this scam is a very convenient way to just rechannel those enemies and also make money off of it, not just politics off of it. Does that make sense, or am I reading too much into what's going on in Assam?
No, I think those were the two axes for me as well. So there was that already, the politics of disenfranchisement, the fact that if you go to those areas, meet anyone, regardless of what they do, whether they run a shop or have a dairy, everyone's main occupation is the struggle to prove for them or for someone else in their family that they are citizens of India and they're not infiltrators, they're not Bangladeshis. And whether that takes showing their family tree going back generations, whether their grandmother crossed the border before the 1974. So many people have already, done fantastic, phenomenal reporting from this part of Assam that I don't have to sort of describe just how inhuman that struggle is for most people that you'll meet there. So so these scams that Sadik and I found were taking place in this context, and very much sort of in the openings that this enfranchisement had created. So yeah, as you said, so there are every family, like I mentioned, most families have a common struggle, and every family has a middleman who is trying to, because a lot of these people also like paperwork illiterate. Everyone has someone who will go to the offices, the foreigners tribunals and the local. Every district has a local NRC office, and there are lawyers who then, if your appeal is rejected, then you hire a lawyer to appeal the decision. And so there's just again like a vast sort of network of middlemen, and there are also then like people who will offer, if say you don't have legitimate paperwork or if you've lost it. In a lot of cases things have been lost, and especially in floods, because it's also an area that's subject to floods. So once a year they also have to leave all their belongings, sometimes tie them in loose polythene bags and just go away to a higher land and then come back. So they lose a lot of paper. So if you've lost the paper, or God forbid, if your grandmother did cross at an earlier date, then you paid someone to make a fake certificate showing that, some people, they had married twice, and then so they needed to show that their newer wife's legitimacy or citizenship. So there was always someone or the other also trying to create a fake certificate. And I think those then again created this economy that when you want to run a scam, an insurance scam at that level, where paperwork is everything, death certificates and birth certificates and insurance forms, and then that comes in really handy.
And it's interesting, right? Normally, all of us city people, I grew up in a big city. I've largely only lived in big cities. You think of big cities as the place where these sorts of sophisticated scams are going to pop up. But you could never have this happening in Delhi or Bombay at this kind of scale, because the precarity with paperwork doesn't exist at the same scale, right? The presumption is most people who are in Delhi or Bombay, even if they're migrants, even if they're relatively disenfranchised, already have, most domestic help in Delhi will have their Aadhaar card and a ration card. They have some means of negotiating whatever they need with the state. Yeah. So actually the most sophisticated scam ends up happening in rural areas. That's why you call this the new farming, right? This is not a something that can really happen in a productive urban setting where a lot of the infrastructure that is required doesn't exist. But it's also just a collapse in state capacity, right? I don't just mean in finding the fraudsters or punishing them. I mean, the state is now incapable of doing simple things like counting people, figuring out who lives where, whose birth certificate is a real birth certificate. I mean, this is a collapse of the state at a level that doesn't quite match the reality of how India is sold, or the Indian state is sold, right? Indian state does Aadhaar and UPI and runs the largest election and, runs lands on Mars, but it can't correctly issue birth certificates or correctly monitor its agents to issue 10 standard certificates. It's really, it's frightful.
Yes, I think both points are quite relevant. Yeah, these particular scams could not happen in the cities. Although I grew up in small towns, I immediately relate to these stories and the context in which these scams are happening. I was telling someone that I until only a few years ago I still had my bank passbooks because I still do have the fear that if you lose something like that, you can just like never be able to access your money. So yes, and the state, yes, I think it's failing in two ways. It is failing in even like being able to basically track who the benefits are going out to. Even something simple as if like one person has 5 accounts and all of the accounts they're getting money from the same welfare scheme. I think the state should be able to trace and stop that at some point, but it's not. That's one failure. The second failure is just like the the numbers of people that across the country that it has alienated in one way or the other, who feel completely cut off from any sense of progress, belonging. Indeed, like large sections of the population who feel like they have nothing to lose, and in some sense they want they want to strike back and to presence like to sort of like register their presence in an economy that will not give them any opening, in a society that will crush them at every opportunity. So I feel like I hope that I am able to convey the point that these scams are not just about ingenuity, which they are, and ambition, but also the number of places where they are arising from a sense of injustice and oppression.
And desperation.
Yeah, yeah. My husband is also an economist, like you. I think when he read the whole thing the first time, he had a one-line commentary, which is he said, "It's in India, fraud seems to be becoming the individual's default response when society fails." And that's like I've written 100,000 words, but I think that it remains sort of true across the stories.
Yeah. No, and I think that's right, especially because of the scale of it. Because, again, going back to the head of our conversation, if this was more about the individual and their ingenuity and them wanting to be criminal masterminds, you would see this in far smaller numbers, right? Just off the bat. Like the fact that there are so many people who think they have to do this or they want to do this because the alternative is worse and there's nothing to lose and they're desperate and there's really no other sensible opportunity left for them just shows exactly what you said that Mihir was saying, which is we've completely failed to provide economic opportunity for a very vast number of young people in India.
Yeah.
The second part of it is that I found striking is the women. And I know you also talk about women when you shift the lens to China and the United States and the pig slaughtering schemes and all that. So we'll get to that in a second. But in India, the role of women I found quite interesting, cutting across 2-3 different ways. Even in this world, they have very little agency, right? So one, women are more likely to be victims of the scams themselves. Second, they are more likely to be the intended beneficiaries of a lot of new schemes, right? A lot of the new schemes are targeting women. And that, like this, this life insurance scheme is supposed to target widows and especially young widows who've been struck by an untimely death and all that stuff. But these women can't negotiate the welfare state at all, right? And like Shayana has written about this, Yamini Iyer has written about this, multiple people have written about how this negotiating whatever benefits you're supposed to get through the state intermediary is not a straightforward process. So they get scammed almost in a new way, right? So one, the system is setting them up to fail. Second, they are more likely to be victims of, all these agents and things like that. And third, they're also the ones who are least likely to have paperwork to start with, right? Because women are not the ones who are always sent to school. Most women are now in these rural areas are not the ones who are finishing or studying up to 10th standard to get the 10th standard pass certificate, so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's this whole other layer of they are more likely to get trafficked and put in certain sort of, indentured servitude kind of scams where they're calling people and, scamming them out of money in some kind of, pornographic calling scheme, or even just, the lonely lovers calling, number scheme and things like that. So the women seem to be everywhere in your story, but they're never the ones with agency who are controlling it. Like, I would have loved to see the female mastermind in all of this. That would have given me some joy.
There is actually, there is. I mean, I'll come to that. Yes, it was. I mean, in the case of Assam, we spoke about Aisha. It was heartbreaking, first of all, to see how the the women were often the living people who were
erased.
And I mean, what's the you can't think of a worse thing to do to
Yeah.
a living person. And then so it begins there. But also, like, in a lot of these cases, if women are on the face of it included as a collaborator, because that's where I was hoping that the story would get interesting. Not in Aisha's case, but in a different case of insurance scam. There's a woman whose husband has died, and it's very clear that he was then shown to be alive at the time of his death, and then the insurance scamsters took bought life insurance policy in his name with his wife as a beneficiary. And it also became quite clear to Sadiq and me that she was in on it, that they told her that she would get some money off of it. And yet the women, and not just in this case, they would just cheat the woman of what she was owed. Or if a man has died, and if you have taken out 6 insurance policies for him, and you're expecting, I don't know, like 20 lakh, 30 lakh for one dead man, like the payout, the woman is only getting 1 lakh in all this. So the number of ways in which I kept thinking that even if the women were entering this economy, there was like just no chance of fairness. And I think the tables only turn when you make these scams truly digital. So you remove, in some sense, like a lot of our structural inequalities. And in some sense, like, there are scams in which the women have an immediate advantage. Because then again, like, if you think about a romance scam in which already you have like a skewed gender issue is like a huge factor, and you have like if you have like a single woman who's working to be a romance scammer, no one can stop her. I mean, she can be whatever she wants. She can earn as much money as she wants. And so I have a character like that. And God, she was brutal, and she was very clear about what this meant in a societal way, right? Because she was trying to recruit me, and she would keep saying that bakra tha, he was a target. And why should we feel bad? Because we were women making our way through cities like Delhi and Gurgaon. You can hardly leave the house or walk down a street without feeling like you're in real danger. If you can have like this, so a lot of them, the women romance scammers saw that as a harmless prank, but also enjoyed doing it from a clear sense of societal revenge. Yeah, I could not blame them.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, when I was reading the book, there are very few people I wanted to blame. I mean, maybe the pig butchering scams, there is something really insidious going on there, but most of these people are just kind of still at a point where they're eking out a living. I mean, no one here is like Danny Ocean from Ocean's 11, walking away with hundreds of millions of dollars, having robbed a very rich man. So it doesn't seem like any of them are like, cartoonish villains of some sort, if you know what I mean. They all seem very human, very desperate, in terrible situations. Maybe the Brahmin brothers from Kumbakonam seem a little bit more like, your typical villains, like showering gold from helicopters in a Ponzi scheme. I love that, by the way. I love that the helicopter part of the story really charmed me.
But I don't agree. I'll butt in to say that I don't agree. I think this is what happened. Like, let's go back to the scamsters in Jamtara.
Yeah.
They get in from a point of having nothing. Like I said, nothing to lose.
Yeah.
You've no education, no job, the farms have already died out. No one's like even employing you on their farm. You've gone to the city. You've like worked for a few months. You've come back. You're just like not saving enough money to have that as a sustainable option. Whatever the starting point is, it's mostly like it's mostly nothing to lose. But this is a world in which, unlike when you have a job and you wait years for a promotion, 2 months can change your life. So within 2 months, like from having nothing to lose, you can have like a solid, enviable bank balance.
Yeah.
You can build a giant house with like every luxurious fitting that you can think of. Like, you can have a Art Deco balcony and tall gates and a playground for your children. You can send your children to English medium schools, and your wife can wear only designer clothes. All of this is possible, and all of this happens very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I also saw what scams do to people who come from having nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So their sort of mindset like starts to harden quite early on in the journey, and so that makes it harder and harder to go back. They realize just how much money there is to earn if they just stuck around, continued doing this, became more ambitious, involved more people, and the and finally, I have never met a scammer, at least in the Indian context, who ever lost the awareness of what happens when they come out. Because I tried. I've met people who tried, who like say went to jail and then they came out and they just didn't want to do it. There was again like they could go back to nothingness, and people sometimes would ask me, but they've already sort of earned so much money, lakhs, crores of rupees, stuffing money literally like in a Bollywood sense, like stuffing money in their mattresses. That's what the police would find in these desperately poor villages in Santhal Pargana. But that money comes and it goes. So yeah, they buy these, they invest in their building these houses, they buy very luxurious things, and their wives are now running cooperatives that need funding. They have started these shops that need some financial support, and then they just find they can't get out. And they're, also like, I did talk about like there being less of a moral burden if there's no, there's not some sobbing victim that they can see. But I could see their attitudes hardening and like their justifications becoming a little more cold-blooded. And that broke my, it is devastating for the victims.
No, I didn't mean to suggest that I only feel for the criminals, like not at all. And of course,
No, I know that you wouldn't.
It's totally wrong. So just to be clear on it. But it seems like it is exactly what got them into these criminal sort of situations is the same reason they can't easily get out. They neither have the capacity nor do they have the scaffolding where they can take all this easily earned capital and now invest it in productive parts of the economy. That doesn't exist. A deep productive economy doesn't exist in that setup.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of was this scammer trying to then fund his political like election campaign, because that's one way to then solidify.
Not exactly a productive economy either. No, but what I mean is, like, if I imagine a scamster in, let's say, Bombay, right? Like, let's imagine, I mean, they're all, there used to be stories of these dance bar women, right? Who've managed to get quite a lot of money from, their lovers or bakras or whichever way you want to characterize it. They had ways of using that money a little bit more productively. They would lend it to their neighbors. They would start some small enterprise. It could be like a Tupperware sharing kind of enterprise. But they had productive parts of the economy which could absorb their capital. Even though the capital was easy money or criminal money, there was somewhere for it to be deployed where they weren't completely out of options and they weren't stuffing it in the mattresses or buying designer clothes, right? I think exactly the problem that you see in Jamtara and Diogar and all these places is that's the reason there was nothing productive happening. So that's why they got into this business in the first place. Once they made money, unless they leave that area, there is nothing productive to channel it to.
Right. Yes. And so the only thing that they ever thought of in these places was politics. Because you understand political economy much better than I do. We want some more sort of stable political economy sector in these places, but politics.
Yeah.
But like fighting an election.
Yeah, and this basically what they're using the money for quite clearly is to move up the status ladder, right? Either through a bigger house or, through becoming important cooperatives or, some kind of small business owner in that society or becoming the local MLA or supporting the local MLA. But that's really what they're negotiating, because the only thing to be negotiated in these economies is that there's no real productive, deep economy. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, the houses were actually a very clever move, and if someone hadn't explained to me, it would never strike me. But like, if the police raids you, they take away everything, all the mattresses and the money, the house still stands.
Yeah. And the house is in your name, and it's very hard to dispossess someone of a home.
Yes, and that's why they went all out. Italian marble. So some of these villages, they had houseware stores, very fancy houseware stores, because the scamsters were buying, the best sort of mirrors and marbles and remote control curtains, because the house will still be there.
Yeah. No, some physical capital, right? Which
No,
can't
but
easily
the
be
only other thing other than politics was that I think not in some cases, I think in most cases, when they had money, they sent their children to proper schools.
Yeah.
And cynical as it sounds, I thought that maybe if we waited and saw where that could go for the next generation, if I return to the story, I would like to follow the children.
Yeah.
And maybe that then is like a real upliftment rather than this very sort of brief spell of overnight money.
Yeah, the kids going to better schools, but it still seems to me like the children going to better schools are likely to have a better future only if they leave.
Yes. Yes.
There is a particular poverty trap that they're all in. It's no surprise this is happening in these awful places. I mean, Kumbakonam is the only place which is still part of a growth economy where something like this is happening. And there, it's quite clear that it's not a phishing scam. It's a Ponzi scheme, which is a very growth economy sort of scheme in the first place, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot of capital. There are people making good money and they want to get better returns than what the market is offering them. And this is their way of doing that. And it's being negotiated, of course, through status and buying people and buying the locals and, whatever the elite structure is. But that's still a rich people and a rich economy and a productive economy scam. You have Ponzi scams in New York City. You will not get these kinds of scamsters. What's happening in Assam in New York City, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I want to switch gears to the second part of your book, which was deeply related to the first, but was completely different. It was like, oh, now we've suddenly, left this world that I'm a little bit more familiar with into the world of sort of Chinese apps and Chinese data mining and targeting, and also simultaneously like just very sophisticated digital infrastructure, which can then be routed both through the formal economy and the crypto economy and make money for people just in order to defraud them at a later stage. Like the nature of these scams felt quite different in the second half of your book. So first, for those who are completely uninitiated, this was the first time I knew any of this, by the way. I wasn't aware. I live in a very nice, happy world where people put their money in the S&P 500 sort of, index funds. I had no clue any of this was happening. I didn't know that suburban housewives who live next to me in the United States are the ones who are being targeted. So, one, can you just walk us like a Cliff Notes version for the completely uninitiated and who haven't yet read the book because it's just come out, what that world looks like, and then we can dive deeper into it.
I'll be happy to. Maybe it's not so quick, but the story that I follow in the book is, to my mind, is not set in any sort of physical geography or doesn't sort of like really portray any one country alone. And that's why sometimes like you'll think, oh, there's India and China and Pakistan and Thailand and Cambodia and Myanmar. But think of it this way: the one thing that I follow in the whole book, never losing sight of it, is the story of this vast scam force that we have built in India. Millions of people.
Yeah.
Who, for a number of reasons that we've already talked about, there is this like absolute economic collapse and there's societal failure. There is, I would take you back to thousands and thousands of years back to caste system and how that, to talk about empathy and the lack of it. So all of these factors have been created this very thriving, sophisticated, technically astute scam force that is willing to cross the line into the ethical gray zone it won't take that much convincing for them to drop to cross over to the ethically gray line, and sometimes they won't know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
So yes, just to come back, so then this is the story of this scam force, and so then when you have so many people who've been failed by the job economy and various other things, they can be recruited by anyone trying to scam any part of the population anywhere, whatever, you can just dream of a target base and put these people on it, and there you have a scam. So so someone like that, like someone in the scam force, can be recruited by a scam center in Delhi that's running these, like say these digital arrest scams or these KYC scams or the lottery scams or the credit card scams and the loan scams and the job scams. There's anything like every digital touch point, every time that you transact with someone is a way for them to weaponize it against you. But it can also be once you have that, and once you have once you throw in globalization with like visas on arrival and cheap flights and like even like the sort of the basic structures of outsourcing, you can then take this labor and put it to any kind of dark use. And I'm not even like getting into any other forms of dark use, but just the scams alone. And so it means that someone sitting in China can recruit these people in India and then give them a target base. That target base could be also be that could be people in India, so they scam each other, or the target base could be someone in Singapore or America, or better even, so that like everything is more runs more efficiently, and these people can't leave and can't sort of don't get too many ideas. Why don't like it's easier to then traffic them to locations where the where the foreigners who are running the scam can control them and tell them exactly what to do, give them timings, give them targets, give them scripts, and watch them day and night. That is simply what the story is. So once you have that scam, then that is part two, where I just like show the progression from domestic scams to transnational scams. So you have these Chinese companies coming in, and at first, before COVID, these were actual. They started actual offices all over your big cities, tech hubs in Gurgaon and Bangalore and Mumbai, and they would hire unemployed Indian people and they would have them work for these apps, these scam apps, whether they're romance apps or loan apps or betting apps. And they were, they were told to, I mean, the targets were people in India, but once that story takes a darker turn, I look at the human trafficking element, and then like that's happening at a very organized scale, and that's where things become more organized. They become more anonymous. The stakes multiply in some sense, and so like you have at least like I could think of 4 levels of recruitment that gets people to these camp compounds in Southeast Asia. It could be someone in their community, there's someone on Facebook or Telegram channels. I had to join all of these networks on Facebook, on Telegram, and then there are these recruiters also sitting in these scam compounds in Southeast Asia who are completely anonymous, who just like pass down the job, and then it keeps getting communicated further down the human trafficking chain. And once you arrive at these places, these scam compounds, there's no getting out. Someone will take your passport, and then the torture begins.
Can you separate these two a little bit? So there's that whole like the Gurgaon kind of recruiting almost has a call center feel to it. The way that like a lot of young people were graduates with basic English speaking skills. They were trained to be phone operators at these various call centers. These people are also trained. They're given a script. They're given very clear KPIs and deliverables. You have to target N number of people in a day. That kind of recruiting feels a little bit different because early they may have not known what they're getting into, but pretty soon they know they're scamming someone, right? So, and there are more options to quit or leave. I'm not saying it might be easy, but it's easier. How does that then transition into moving them to other countries in Southeast Asia, taking away their passport? And that is now a whole other, that is almost like working off your debt, servitude, right? There's something else going on. There's the promise of a great new job, and sometimes they know they're going to work in the scam economy, but most of the times they really don't know they're going to work in this kind of a scam economy. So what are these two different recruiting mechanisms like? Because you've traced the story.
The mechanism is the same in both the cases. In all of these cases, even though the book deals with 2 cases, it begins with a fake job offer. Because when you're looking at this scam workforce, most of them are just looking for a job because they don't have a job. So someone gives them a job offer. And in some cases, like actually for this guy who was in village in Karnataka, he gets the job offer from a recruiter in his community, in his village. But that recruiter has been passed down that job from someone from Telegram, and the person in Telegram got that job offer from someone in a scam center in Myanmar. But anyway, coming back to the connecting these two worlds, the hook is the same. There's a job that doesn't exist, but you have been offered the job. Now, in like what I call the traditional Indian call center scams, which is where dreamers ended, someone in like say Delhi or Bombay or Chandigarh will see that job offer, maybe they got it on Facebook or someone, or they found it on an employment portal, or someone actually gave them a call and said, I found your number somewhere, and why don't you send me your CV? And then they'll receive a fake job offer. And then they'll be given an address to come to begin their job, like their employment. And once they go there, they'll be given a training and they'll be given a script. And very quickly, as you mentioned, it'll be clear to them that their job is to take part in a scam. Some people will get freaked out and try to leave, and most people will just take that as something that at that time they think maybe, it's for a few months, and then we'll see where it goes. And then, of course, like some of them start to harden in a pattern that I described before, and they do leave, but to start their own scam centers. So that economy, and I don't go into that economy in this new book, I only mentioned it in the introduction. It is massive. It is very well established, organized. These young people sitting in these call centers in Delhi, Bombay, Chandigarh, Asansol, Calcutta, making these actual phone calls, not text messages, to people mostly in the West, US, UK, America, Canada. Like I am currently in the UK, and every other day I get a call from someone saying they are calling from the HMRC, the His Majesty Revenue and Customs, and the person starts in a British. This person has the British accent, and he says that I have not paid HMRC my taxes for the last several years, and legal proceedings are going to start against me. And so I can press one and talk to someone, and I know where it goes from here. I probably even know parts of Delhi that he or she is already is sitting in, and sometimes I'll talk to.
And you've covered this in
I've
Dreamers,
covered
right?
this in
Like Pawan Pujari and that whole story of there's an actual scam. It's just not happening in His Majesty's Revenue Service. It was the IRS service, but it's kind of,
Yes.
that's what's going on.
IRS, and there is
Script is the same.
HMRC. And so I can sometimes have a conversation. I'll be like, are you in Uttam Nagar, or are you in Gurgaon or something like that? But they're definitely not in the UK. And they're not from the HMRC. That system already exists. And that's where that was my starting point into this shadow economy. But like once you have that workforce, it could also be recruited by someone abroad in like in a really bizarre way, because earlier you had, not earlier, like in a different context, you have people who are sitting in Delhi but scamming people in the UK, pretending to be in the UK. But it's the same people who can be recruited by someone in Myanmar and then trafficked to Myanmar, and there's a similar kind of person, and then they will be scamming someone maybe in the UK or the US or Singapore or Malaysia. But it's the same system. It's just like the story becomes much more dark because of the phenomenon, now well documented, of scam slavery, which is pretty much centered in Southeast Asia. It's very organized. It's mostly run by Chinese origin cyber scam cartels. Most of them are fugitives from mainland China. And they have set up these elaborate operations, like at the level of whole cities. One of the first journalists who went there very rightly described it as Silicon Valley of cyber scams. So you have the whole cities that are designed to execute these sophisticated cryptocurrency investment, romance scams, and you're targeting mostly wealthier parts of the world, but like say also places like Singapore. So they're not so restricted by geography. It's just that like they need to have victims who can pay in millions of dollars.
And here, the nature of the scam is a little bit different. I mean, again, criminality is criminality, and the victims are, of course, losing everything in all these different scams. So I don't want to make that distinction. But there does seem to be something a lot more insidious about, I'm going to string this person along for 2 years. And in those couple of years, I'm going to make sure they make money, because my way of gaining their trust is that they do see some financial return. And when I have really seen their little pot of gold grow is when I, sort of take the rug off of their feet. And there's something very different and much more devastating about that than just the simple scams of, someone called and they pretended to be a bank officer. And, that just still seems to be a low-level, single point of contact, not, integrating themselves into your lives in some way. This feels different. Did it feel different to you when you were tracking this?
Yeah, it was terrifying from my first minute into the story, because the people that you're dealing with, Because when you have this, like I said, I keep going back to this scam force that they can be recruited by anyone, and so the people on the other end of the line can be anyone. They can be like someone as seemingly harmless as insurance scamster in Haryana or Assam, but it also can be like a violent gangster in a part of the world that where
in Cambodia
or
or
Myanmar, where you
Myanmar.
don't know the language, you don't know anyone, and you're trapped. And if you don't scam someone, can there can be starvation, there could be beatings, there could be death, and yet even though like that very terrifying threat hovers over most of them, there are people within the system who are co-opted, who switch over, who at some point tell themselves that they're going to do it willingly. I then saw those people rise. People from and in this centers, people. It was not like when I was reporting from India, it seemed very much like North India is doing much worse than South India. So you will be seeing more scammers. The poorer parts, more disenfranchised parts like not the Northeast, Jharkhand, यहाँ पे होगा ये सब system. But वहाँ पे तो हर जगह से लोग आते हैं. Yeah, people come from everywhere. So there were people from Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. And I used to be on the phone with so many of them. But also, of course, UP and Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. And once you're there, you can only leave if someone pays the scam center the amount that they bought you for from your recruiter.
Yeah, it's indentured servitude, basically.
Yes.
Clean and simple,
Yes.
right? You got to pay and buy your freedom.
But towards the end of the reporting cycle, I was already running into activists who were telling me that they were rescuing people from these centers, either by contacting the embassy or by sometimes the activists would raise money and pay the compound owners. And sometimes these scamsters were only getting out with the help of the activists, so they didn't have to pay the servitude money, which in a lot of cases they didn't have to begin with, so that they could join another center that paid them better and also like gave them a little more freedom. There were centers that allowed you to go out occasionally or even like visit home, India or somewhere else, because this was like a system where you could also see how the same desperation and other like structural issues that created the scam force in India was creating similar scam labor pools elsewhere. Uganda, the people from Uganda and Azerbaijan and Turkey. So like just Bangladesh, the Philippines, like everywhere along the poorer parts of the world.
So how did you, I mean, I've tracked your journalism long enough to know how you've sort of made your way into some of these Indian stories, right? That's literal field work. You get a phone call, you start chasing contacts, you go one after the other, you visit these places, you talk to them, you embed yourself in these Facebook networks. So that feels quite similar in some sense to the kind of work that you did in Dreamers. The Cambodian compound turn in the book feels very different. So as an investigative journalist, how do you enter that world? Because one, it's physically unsafe. You could potentially be a victim because you have a digital footprint and people could try to, corner you in various ways. But how do you navigate that world? Is it completely long distance? Are you able to go there? Do you have any layer of interaction with the higher up mafia and the gang lord?
I have been in scarier situations in our own great land. So it's not like...
No, but I've read about those scarier situations, so I know a lot more about them than the scarier situations in Cambodia, which I know a lot less about.
I was much more scared in India meeting, like, say, the cow rakshaks or the cow vigilantes of Haryana 7 years ago, and some of that showed up in Dreamers. I feared for my life, truly. And that was 7 years ago. I was much younger. But this time, yes, it is scary, but it's the same method, Shruti. It's no different. It's like if I had the clarity that I was following the journey of these people, the scam force, and then wherever they go, whoever hires them, I'll have to go. So that's what took me to Southeast Asia, and it feels more scary because the people who are running these scams are more scary, and the whole the structure is scary in that, like, there are some of the scam compounds have hired actual criminals to guard these compounds, and people, and they've killed people for crossing them, for opposing them, for trying to escape from these compounds. They have threatened journalists, and also, like, But like in India, these systems are supported by localized corruption going
Yeah.
up to the levels of the prime minister. So I could understand that if I got into trouble, it would be it would be
Bad.
devastating.
Very
It
bad.
would be devastating. Yes,
Yes.
very bad.
I didn't mean it from a if you get into trouble point of view, because I mean, your entire business is getting into trouble in some sense, right? Right from Dreamers up to here. It's like you're going to places where if anyone figured out what you're doing, they would not trust you with the story necessarily. Or if they do tell you there's fear of exposure, you're always kind of, in a precarious position where if they ever figure out you're truly going to write this up or not protect their identity or anonymity, you could get into some very, very serious problems, right? Physically devastating consequences. The reason I'm asking the question about danger is not just the magnitude of danger or that it's a foreign country and you can navigate India better, but do your standard radars of what is safe and unsafe work the same way in Cambodia, the way they might work in Jharkhand, which you're so familiar with? Like, when you start pulling a thread and you start calling the next person and the next person and going for meetings, does that feel different in some sense?
I mean, beyond the language aspect, not so much. And even with language, I mean, I don't know Assamese that well, and I don't know Tamil at all. No, I actually don't think so, because if you're going into a dangerous place as a journalist, then the structure within which you work is kind of similar. You already, unfortunately, have activists who know much more about this world and are probably taking greater risks. So like with Assam or with in other places, I did know who the activists were. I was in touch with them, so they would advise me on where to go. Like in the case of Sinukville in Cambodia, an activist actually gave me the very own taxi in which she travels. I do take advantage of those larger structures. And yeah, I I had two phones with me because she told me that if I were to get kidnapped by one of these scam lords, if they found me snooping around, then they will just throw me in a room and take my phone. So I had a different phone, and then I had, you have then all the numbers, the Indian Embassy, and like this Facebook group of these activist organization, and they would, and I would then take out that phone from under my clothes and so on and so forth. So yeah, there are activists. There are if a lot of times I mean, unless you're dealing with like terrorist organizations, a lot of times people don't want to harm journalists. So that has I have used that to my advantage. But like, yes, but I know that I'm still taking a risk. But no, it doesn't feel different. It doesn't feel different. In some sense, I think I know that if I'm like in a country where I don't understand the language or the culture, I will just like take more precautions. So in some sense,
Yeah.
I do, like in this case, you'll have seen in the story, I never got out of the car because I was told
Yeah.
never to go into these compounds. If this
Yeah.
was in India, I would have tried. I would have tried to find. I have
No,
gone into
that's the
scams.
reason I got the sense of danger, because like you can't get out of the car to chase your story. So it just feels already more ominous than the other chapters when one is reading them. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. The other thing that has really helped my writing is to like stop being trying to be someone who's finding out the truth or trying to tell the full and complete story. Or I've never really seen myself as an investigative journalist. A lot of time, I'm not even trying to be a journalist. Like for this book, I'm trying to be a scammer. I'm trying to profile someone who's trying to
Yeah.
scam me. It's everything. Like once I've immersed in a world, I'm ready to do anything. Not illegal work. I've not scammed anyone. But like if you remove that from the picture, you can get so much more.
Yeah.
And that conceit that that again, like the whole thing of like chasing the truth, because if you write any story deeply, I'm sure you have had that experience, you are investigating. Because without if I was writing about a fashion show, and
Yeah.
I have investigated it. I have looked at every single participant in that fashion show. In a beauty pageant, I once wrote about a beauty pageant, and to me, sure, that's all it is. So
But the book is also different, as you say, right? It's not just investigating one story and getting to the absolute bottom of it. What you're really doing is you're connecting lots of different dots, which are not obvious to those of us on the outside that these are actually connected. So in some sense, it's really like the work of a political economist, right? It's like patterns.
Yeah.
You're tracing out the pattern and you're saying, oh, you see this pattern here, and then you see a slightly different one here. And so it's like, so it's investigative in a very different kind of way, like a pattern prediction way almost.
Yes. And I mean, my husband, he does not like to take any credit for it, but I work closely with him in that once I've written something, he reads it as someone who thinks much more like bigger picture than sometimes I can, because I'm so deep in a story, and like I can't think. Sometimes I can't think beyond I'm overwhelmed a lot of times. And so he'll then tell me what he sees, some of the larger patterns. And sometimes I'll go back to the story when I'm rewriting it or when I'm editing it. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to then do the larger work of connecting the dots rather than following certain threads. I'm really grateful to him because this book, I think he like the number of times he's read it, it's unbelievable.
I love Mihir. Hi, Mihir, if you're listening. I love you. I love your work, but I'm not giving him any credit for this. The credit is entirely going to you, Snigdha. I think he'll appreciate that too.
Yeah.
So one thing I was very charmed by is because, you told me that when the Jamtara thing happened, the first thing they always say is, oh, someone from our area managed to scam Amitabh Bachchan, right? And this comes back to Amitabh Bachchan, even in your personal entry point, because you are getting KBC scam calls for this. You've spoken with so many people and traced so many threads. It's impossible to tell us exactly how you did this, but like just a sense of how, if someone wants to write a book like this, how do they get into this in the first place? Like what made you keep talking to this KBC chap and then follow that part of the story? Like how do you, when is a phone call and a random thing that happens to you just a random thing, and when is it the next project, I guess?
So the one thing that is the beginning of all stories that I write, whether it's a magazine piece or a whole book, is immersion. So I cannot work without that. And it takes up a lot of my time, but that's what I'll advise anyone who wants to write a book like this or a piece or a story. Once you decide that you want to put yourself in a world, then really put yourself in it. And sometimes even if it means that you forget to pay rent, and that's fine. That's the price that you will pay. And that work, then immersion, it sounds romantic, but it's actually quite technical. So for each of these stories, like when I'm chasing the KBC scammers, and you'll have seen in the chapters, I'm following them. I'm following their every move. I'm following them minute by minute. I'm following every website that's popping up. I'm going on YouTube every day, every other day, to find out who has posted a video, who has mentioned Rana Pratap, because that's the alias that scammers use. I'm trying to go to the police station and actually do the legwork and then find out what they have found on KBC scams for a different chapter, like say coming back all the way out to the pig butchers.
Sorry, can I stay with the KBC story for just 1 second? At what point did you kind of offer yourself as an employee, like set up a fake identity, and like that seems, I mean, I know that's part of your immersive method, but like, when is the story just talking to a bunch of people doing background research, and when is it, oh, I really need to get into this and maybe deal with this as a fellow employee, and it's not a field visit anymore, now I'm in it?
So if you have devoted large parts of your career talking to bad guys, then at some point you do run the limitation of they will only tell you so much as a journalist, and sometimes they will not talk to you at all. So I'm not the only one who came up with this method, but a lot of writers are trying to go deeper with people who do bad things, like criminal things, unethical things. They do sometimes, like they have to enter the world as a participant. So I have done this before, and again, like with the scammers, I said I will say I will work with you, and I also knew that this would work because I had already been following the story of dreamers and the desperation for jobs and status, and the whole, like, I was trying to create a portrait of this generation that was driven by aspiration, and so I knew that if I told someone that would work for them, they will take me, they'll take me in. And then it'll go somewhere. And I'm still doing that, actually. Like with the HMRC scammers, I will I talk to them sometimes because that's the easiest way, and then that can't be your only way, obviously, because
Yeah, of
you
course.
can be misled into a totally irrelevant rabbit hole. So then you have to also talk to scammers as a journalist, and also like talk to the police and talk to the victims and go to the court and see what happens and get copies of FIR, and so they're like, yeah, so yes, that immersion. So you go, you take whatever entry you can get.
Yeah. And then the second part, sorry, I interrupted you when you were talking about Assam and Cambodia and what you did in those circumstances.
Yes, I think I just like spent so much time just living on these Telegram groups because Telegram is more anonymous in its messaging structure than even like WhatsApp in some sense, because you don't even need a number. And this whole like recruiting for big butchers and across Southeast Asia was happening on Telegram. So I would be on Telegram a lot. I think the amount of leads that I got from just joining the seemingly banal group called Indians in Cambodia Facebook group. Why would anyone join it if they were not Indians in Cambodia? But I joined it, and God, how much it benefited me.
Yeah.
Just posted one message there. I started to like comment on people who were already saying, because it was like a group for people asking other Indians, where can I find a Kathak class, or where can I find a cook to make me biryani? And then suddenly, like, it was getting flooded with messages saying, my brother is trapped in Cambodia, or like, friends do not accept a job in Cambodia if it says XYZ. And I started messaging these people, and that totally changed the course of the story for me, access wise. That like led me to the exact place that my destination, Cambodia, gave me sources. When I like months before I even went to Cambodia, the people already did talk to me because I spent that much time building sources, building trust over Facebook messages, Facebook calls. I had a separate phone for this entire period of reporting and writing, because that was my scam phone. Scammers will contact me. I would contact scammers. I would try to execute scams. Scammers would give me steps to execute, and I would go along and I had to take someone's money. So yes, I went all
So
in.
you've scammed people.
I've not scammed anyone.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So you just go up to that point and then don't scam them. But you see the script, you see the training,
yes.
you get a peek into all of it, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like if they said, can you download this list from this app? Because there are these apps where you could download a list of numbers that were active on WhatsApp in India.
Yeah.
That seemed harmless. So I would download that list and I would tell them that I have downloaded it.
And these are basically lists being bought and sold of high net worth individuals, or, people who are targets and things like that, right? Yeah, exactly. So last couple of questions. One, again, I don't mean to read too much into it, but it just feels like the aspiration economy story that you started with in Dreamers. Like, now you show us what happens when that takes a dark turn. Is that a good way of thinking about Scamland? Like, I'm not saying all aspirations going to end up with you scamming other people, but there seems to be something about the aspiration economy and that general point of view that, hey, anything to get ahead is now fair game, right? And there were not just hints, there was like a big thread of that in Dreamers, and now this is just a really insidious version of it.
Yes. It's very much the same story going into a darker zone for me. Because with Dreamers, I was trying to follow people from different backgrounds, and everyone seemed to have had a clear-cut aspiration or dream they wanted to be, whether they wanted to be rich or famous or powerful, but it was very clearly like a thing that they seemed very different from how I thought of myself, even though I was only a few years older to them when I began reporting Dreamers. I was working full-time as a journalist, and I would travel across India. And I was talking to young people everywhere, and I was very curious how they thought of themselves, their lives, their prospects. Because I was a young person coming from a small town. I thought so much about myself and where I was in the world and how the world saw me, what I could do, my limitations, my limitations, but also the benefits that I had coming as an outsider, the ways in which I could see the others that the others could not. And I think that is there in that has defined all of my writing. So I was curious how the other young people in similar places saw themselves. And we kept coming this conversation kept coming back to the point of their aspirations, the dreams, and they would keep dragging me back to just talking about what they wanted to be. So even in the poorest villages, I would meet someone from the most disadvantaged section, and this guy would tell me, I want to be the richest person in the world. And I kept hearing things like this. So I started following some of them, I identified some of them, started following them. And towards the end, and beyond the period of after the book's release, it seemed to me, became quite obvious that only some of them had succeeded. I'm not talking about the people who are in the book, but like the larger set of people that I had followed. And for the people that I succeeded, I could see that they already had something. They were from like a Banya background, so they had caste privilege or they had family connections, they had some backing. And for the others, I could just see them drifting and they would remain in touch with me. And so then I started to think that I thought of them, I framed them like as a totally different generation that was defined by and driven by aspiration. And then they had seemed to think that just because they had these aspirations, that they were willing to put in whatever it took, that they thought that those structural barriers would dissolve.
Yeah.
But just because they wanted to, they were not going to dissolve. And they did not dissolve. And I started thinking in this way much after The Dreamers was published. Because like some of the people that I'd followed, including a major character from the book, I could see them make moral compromises to get where they wanted to be. Like one of the characters in the book wanted to be into politics, and I could see her leave her idealistic political setting and switch over to a more sort of a scenario where she could actually win an election ticket because she's a woman, and for all of her striving, no one was giving her a ticket.
This is Richa Singh.
Yes, none of the progressive parties were letting her career proceed. And in other stories too, I could see people make more compromises. But the most terrifying thread was like watch people who just desperately wanted a job more than anything else, and the frequency at which they were ending up in these scam networks, whether those scam networks were in their own villages and towns, or they had to come to Delhi and then try to find a legitimate job and then fail at that, and then find their way into a scam center in Delhi or Noida or Gurgaon. And, also like the digital infrastructure in India around 2016, 2017 was growing at so rapidly.
Yeah.
And like with every new digital touch point, there was a way for someone to start a scam.
Yeah.
To weaponize those people who were using them. And so it just seemed like it seemed natural to see where it can go, how many people can be drawn in, how vast it is, and what happens to these people. And
which is so tragic, right? That's the part of it. Like, you've invested in these people's lives in some sense. You've known them, you've tracked them, you're still in touch with them. And it's just heartbreaking that none of it goes anywhere. Even though to me, Dreamers was like just a happier book. Like somehow, it just felt more positive. Like, oh, something could come off of it. Though the stories were like all different kinds of stories. But Scamlands just feels devastating by the end of it.
Dreamers could have been darker. I think I was a younger, more naive person. So even when I saw a structural inequality, I told myself it could be breached. It could
overcome.
It could be overcome. And I believed in aspiration because I was one of them. I thought of myself as one of them, although I was once more privileged. But I think I had changed. I changed a lot between Dreamers and scams. I think India changed a lot, and I was.
Yeah, and writing this book will change you, I think, somehow, right?
More than writing this book, I think those years between when the book came out, 2018, when Dreamers came out, and now 2020, 2025, I don't want to go into what the country has become or what things like break my heart, but yeah, Scamland is darker for a reason, and it's not just because of the scammers.
Yeah, and you're right. Between Geo taking off and UPI taking off and COVID shutting everything down and moving us, like hastening that digital transition more and more without building the necessary capability, it's almost like the script is written for something terrible to unfold at the end of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Even if things were really good in India, there are these other things that have happened in the rest of the world which make some of this almost inevitable.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for writing this. This was so much fun chatting. And thank you for coming and talking to me. I'm so excited. Like, what's the next book?
God, I have no idea, but I want to write something that's not set in India. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. My vote is belly dancing. That's what I would want your next book to be on.
I'll take that into.
Or dancing more generally. Why not, right? Like art, culture. You write beautifully about art. This should be fun.
I want to write about it at some point. It just feels so. When I have time, I would rather dance than write about it because when I have time to write, I have I already have so many assignments and books, and my agent wants to know what I'm writing next. So I think what I would like to give to the world dance wise is I want to start more teaching. I already teach a little bit in the community, but I think that is more needed than another book.
No, I'd love to read the next book, and even happier if it's about art, culture, and other things. But I read everything you write. So this was a joy. This is a real page turner for those who are listening. So I feel like everyone should read the book.
Thank you for having me. It was really great talking to you. I should have made you talk more. So we'll have to return to this.
Not at all. I have nothing.
I think you will have so many thoughts on the book that your listeners have not figured out. So yeah, I think
nothing that you haven't covered in the book, really. So I would urge everyone still to read the book. The book is really great, and the nice thing is, I mean, there are very few big judgments made. It leaves things open ended. There are so many ways your mind goes, so people who are approaching it from different lenses can go different places. I very quickly skimmed Dreamers last night because I was like, I can't remember any of these people and their names. Like the witty feed. I mean, the most obvious things like jumped and they were salient in my head. And then I was like, okay, I really need to skim this very quickly. And then my husband, I sent him on a wild goose chase all over the house. We have like books in multiple different floors in multiple different rooms. And I was like, you got to find Dreamers for me. It's somewhere in this house.
Okay,
so the poor man
putting our husbands to work.
Exactly. So he found the book, and apparently I gave him the completely wrong description. Like whatever I thought was the color of the cover, he said everything except the name of the author in the book is incorrect. So the poor man has chased and found the book. But yeah, so I quickly skimmed it again. It still holds up really, really well. And for me as an economist, you said you want to know my thoughts. We usually think about like employment, unemployment, underemployment. We get these aggregate statistics, right? Which is very useful for the core job that I do, but it doesn't tell us who these people are and what they actually end up doing. And I think for me, Dreamers, that was the biggest sort of like awakening with Dreamers, right? Like a pocket of your brain just opens up. It's like, oh, these guys are not just hanging out at the chai shop. There's a whole other thing going on when there is this kind of, and now with scammers even more so. So that's the core thought. But thank you for doing this. This was so much fun.
Thank you. I had fun.
Ideas of India is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Help us grow by giving us a rating and leaving a review. Follow us on Twitter at @SRajagopalan and at Ideas of India. Also check out our initiative commemorating 30 years of India's market reforms at the 1991project.com.